And a new project begins. This time I'm working on a 2014 Toyota Tacoma. It is in phenomenally good shape. It has only 80,000 kilometers on it. Unfortunately, it got rear-ended recently. As you can see here, the quarter panel, or the bottom of the box here, was absolutely smashed in, and it's broken the tail light, and it has shifted the tailgate very slightly. But I believe what the deal is with this is that the customer, my customer, decided that he would take a cash payment from the person who hit him rather than go through insurance. And as such, he decided to allocate those funds to a high clearance rear bumper, which you can see I have begun here. This is built from 2x4 rectangle tube with a 3/16 wall thickness. I have made some bumper brackets. Let me grab another light here for you. I've made some brackets for the bumper out of 3/16 by 4-inch flat bar on the sides here, and 1/4 inch by 2 flat bar underneath. And it ties into all of the stock locations for the stock bumper as well as the tow hitch. So super strong. We've added a 2-inch receiver and a safety chain plate, which I've welded front and back. And now I'm going to continue on with the build by cutting the sides of the truck here. You can see where I've marked that with some tape. I'm going to cut along the top of that line, and of course we'll do the same to the other side. Now this is a bumper that I have produced once before, so I have some Coroplast mock-up pieces. Let me put this in place for you. So you can see there, that's the basic shape of my top plate. It shows you where the spindle will be located for the swing out. This is going to be a swing away rear bumper. So it shows you the spindle location there. And then I've got a bunch of other Coroplast pieces over here on the bench, which I will use to complete the bumper. I may do some very minor adjustments, so some of these pieces may not be applicable anymore. But for the most part, I think we're going to stick to the original design, and we're certainly going to stick to the original design with these sides here. They worked great last time. Maybe I'll put some pictures of that bumper up on the screen now for you. They're terrible quality pictures, but at least it gives you an idea of what this thing looks like. On the original one, I did the swing out with a 37-inch tire on it. This one's a little smaller. I believe it's a 35, but it'll be the same deal there. It's going to have my rattle-free cam style latch like I normally put on. It will have at least 1 jerry can holder on it, or fuel can holder, maybe 2. It may have a high lift mount on it as well, and it may have some lighting. In the other one, I put some lighting in the flush mount lighting in the bumper here on each side. But in this case, I think it might be better to mount it up on his rooftop tent rack up on the corners there. Just give him a little better light, and it will avoid having to cut through this tube. I really like to keep my tube solid if I can. If I cut holes in here for lights to go in, then I have to plate all around that so that I will have a sealed tube still. I don't want water ingress into that tube. So that's my concern there. So we'll see what happens as the build goes on. But right now, I want to focus on cutting this damaged side away. And I've got a pretty decent straight line there. I'm a little high in this point. You can see that I've marked a little black line on the tape there, or maybe you can see that, and that's just all I did there was just followed a straight edge. I did as good a job as I could with the tape, but it wasn't absolutely perfect. So again, I've just marked where I went a little high, and I'll cut along that black line in that section. But otherwise, we'll remove this completely. I've removed the mud guard already. The customer might want to keep his mud guards and sell them. The bumper that I'm building will have integral removable mud guards. So now what I've done is just taken a look in behind the inner fender here and in behind the box side to make sure that I'm all clear to cut. And I am, other than this wiring right here, I have to be a little bit careful of, but my zip disc isn't going to go that deep. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'll just be careful not to hit that. You can see that some of the sheet metal up here has been pretty mangled, and that's just going to stay that way. There's, you know, I haven't been hired to do anything with that, so the bumper is pretty much going to hide it, and we'll just leave it at that. And then this side is, of course, completely stock and in fine condition. Okay, so the first cut is complete. It went quite well. Reasonably straight right across the top of the tape there. It's dropped away a little bit now, of course, because the side of the box is free. I went over the fender flare as straight as I could, and then I just reapplied tape underneath it once I'd removed the flare itself to complete cutting the box side. There is a brace that's holding the front of the inner fender here to, or I guess you call it the inner fender, to the frame. I'll leave that in place till the very end. And now what I'm going to do is cut along the damaged area here. Let me get some better lighting for you. So I'll cut along this damaged area and I'll remove the panel, and then to a degree I'll pull this back out, but not very much because I don't want to alter the way that the taillight or the box side are. There is a little bit of damage here. It's bowed out just slightly and the light is pushed forward a little bit, but I'm not being hired to do collision repair to this thing. I'm just taking that portion of the box side out so that I can add the high clearance bumper, and for him that was the solution. So if there's any other body work to be done, it will not be done by me, but I will maybe pull this little bit out just as much as I reasonably can without affecting anything else. So my next cut again is going to be down here, then we'll remove that brace. This whole thing should come off. We'll clean that edge up a little bit, and then we'll put some edge guard on it to make it look decent and keep it from being sharp. And then we can put our mock-ups in place for the side of the bumper. And there we are. Suddenly, there is a high clearance side. Just pull that last bit of tape off there. But I've cut the inner fender, I've cut the flare, and of course I've cut the box side. And now we've got this big chunk here that still needs dealing with. So I'll probably come back and cut along this line now. And then that way I can do the same to the other side and it will be, symmetrical. And then I'll just follow this line forward and kind of up and into here and try to smooth this area out as best I can, but pretty straightforward. Now I'll add some edge guard to that and we can put our mock-up in place and make sure that everything's going to fit well. But that certainly gives a ton of clearance. Before, after. And there you are. All cleaned up. So I actually went a little further back here than I wanted to originally, just because it was all mangled looking and ugly. So I just wanted to make a clean line. So I just made some sharp edges and then connected the dots and rounded out the corners. Really straightforward. So now what I'm going to do is go over all of these bare edges with a paintbrush and primer, and then I will do some semi-gloss black paint over them. It won't look amazing, but it won't matter because it's all going to be covered up with edge guard anyway. All right, so I have primed and painted all of the raw metal, and I'm now going to apply some of that edge guard to the edge to clean it up. This stuff has a bead of glue laid into the valley of it already, and it's very, very straightforward. You just apply it to the edge, work it into place, and trim it where need be. Okay, we'll just trim it right to the edge there. And there we are. That's the first piece in place. Now, I don't really have to apply it to the flare itself because, of course, it's just plastic. I'm going to leave it for now, but I may end up putting it on there just to keep the look consistent, but I'd be surprised. I think it looks good just as it is. So there you go, simple as that. Now it's been trimmed, primed, painted, and it has some edge guard on it to protect it and make it look decent. So now we can grab the mock-up and put it in place and start putting the rest of the bumper together. All right, a little more progress has been made. I have begun creating my corners, and let's talk about how I did that. Now I have the light over there right now because that's what I want to show you eventually, but I should just place the top plate briefly on top of the bumper here and show you kind of how I came up with my first piece. So all I did to create the top plate where the spindle will mount into is cut myself a piece of 3/16 by 4 flat bar to the correct angle to match this guy, marked the whole location, and drilled it out. Now for the time being, I have transferred it over to this side. You can see that it's a little long in this aspect. It needs trimming here, but that'll happen later. I'm obviously not putting a spindle over here, but this piece is useful just in terms of getting my angle correct for this back plate. So now I know that I've got my 13-degree angle here exactly as I want it. So I can go ahead and tack the back plate to the bumper and then work off of that, because in this area I'm actually not going to need a top plate here. This is going to be a housing that exists underneath the taillight on this side, so this piece won't even be here, but I wanted to get this angle correct, so that's why I'm using this. So I've just inverted it, and it'll be put to use on the other side permanently later. For now, it's a good guide for this back plate. So I'll tack the back plate here in the middle and at the bottom, and then we'll work with it from there. Okay, so that back plate is tacked in place. I've removed the magnets just so that you can see what's going on there. I left this magnet in place because it's still holding this top plate. This is not getting welded in place, as I said. In fact, it won't exist on this side. It'll only exist on the other side. I'll pull this blanket off here, and you can have a little better look at that. So what's going to happen is now I'm going to put a fairing that kind of goes up in this direction underneath the tail light and creates a nice angle in this area here. So we'll have a bit of a housing around here, and this won't be needed in on this side. So I'll just remove this now, but now I've got my angle correct for that back plate. So I've got, you know, an angle to follow to continue on with the side of the bumper and to set this housing or fairing to. So that's kind of my next step now. One thing I should also have mentioned is I did cut this from a piece of 3/16 by 4 flat bar. However, because this is also going onto a 4-inch piece of tube, but the tube has these radiuses on the corner. So the flat bar would have just made a perfect 90-degree corner here had I used it in its full 4-inch width. So what I did was I just cut it down to 3 3/4 or thereabouts. And then that way it matches at the beginnings of the radiuses or the radii, so that now when I complete this piece, I can put a nice radius on there without having to remove a ton of material and probably just erasing my weld completely in the process. This way I'll just be blending out the weld and leaving lots of purchasing material there. I cut those parts. There's that back plate. I put a 20-degree angle on the top here. This is a 1-inch segment, and I don't know what that is. It's about 4.5 or something like that. And there's the side plate that you can see just behind the magnet there. And that's how I figured out my angle as far as this goes. So again, I'm taking these from templates like that one there on the ground. Those I made up on my last job. I'm not showing you that portion obviously on this one. If you want to see a bumper made from templates, check out my van bumper that I made. It's a rear swing out bumper as well, and it's a red Ford van. There's a bunch of mock-up stuff in there, or you could also look at the Vitara front bumper video. I believe that has a bunch of this kind of stuff in it too. But anyway, you can see where my magnets have situated everything nicely so that we've got a nice flush edge right here. Everything meets up really well. I'm happy with my angle. It looks like it's going to work out quite well in terms of the angle here, and we can check that, and I'll show you how. I'll just put you on the tripod and we'll put some mock-ups in place. All right, so if I take this first Coroplast mock-up and put it in place, you can see it matches up very, very nicely. Really happy with that. And then I'll try to hold that in place. It's not going to be very easy. But this guy here is the top fairing, and you can see that that's going to go in once all this is in. Again, really difficult to hold it all at once, but it's looking pretty decent. I may be just a littlest bit too high with my bumper. The entire bumper could be lowered, and the way that I would do that is just die grind my mounting holes on the side of the bumper mounts upwards by about 1/8 of an inch so the bumper can drop, and then I'll put an 1/8 inch plate, spacer plate in on those bottom holes or bottom mounts, thereby dropping the entire bumper by 1/8 of an inch. So I might do that. We'll see what happens once I actually get a piece of steel in here and line it up. The other thing I could do would be to increase this angle a little bit, and that would of course drop this line as well. but then I'm going to have to increase the angle on this one beyond 45 degrees, and I really don't like the look of that. I like a 45-degree angle across the top here, so I think I'll probably just drop the entire bumper. And there it is, tacked in place with the magnets removed. And you can see now that that's just a big cavity in there, so I didn't need that plate that supports the spindle like it does on the other side. This will just be an empty housing on this side. But I went ahead and added that top plate and side portion in again, the mock-ups, and they look like they'll fit quite well, so I'm pretty happy to go ahead and plasma cut those out now, and then I'll have to take the side panel into my supplier and have them form it. I can form really little pieces like this here in my shop, but I can't form anything over about 20 inches long, and this is more like 36 inches long. So don't quote me on that measurement, that's very approximate. But anyway, we'll get them to form it, and then once it's back, we'll place that in and continue on over to the other side. So I've welded up the passenger side now, the side where the spindle will be placed, and I just did the same thing. I put magnets across here to get a flush surface and tacked all this guy together and used the top plate to figure out this angle by. Now the top plate is set flush using my magnet here, and reasonably that should set a really nice straight edge as well, a perfectly flat angle across the length of the bumper here, or the width of the bumper. But I don't like to trust magnets 100%, and if you look at the gap here, or the relationship between these two pieces, we've got a perfect edge-to-edge meet up there, but as we go, this top plate sinks. So I suspect that it has dropped, or I suspected that it has dropped. So then what I did is I took my magnet away, I put it up here for a nice convenient spot to place a straight edge against. I grabbed a straight edge. Sorry, difficult with one hand. I put it in place using the magnet to hold it up. And if you look very, very carefully, I do have a small gap at the edge of that top plate. Now, that's a big deal in this case because that's where we're mounting our spindle. So of course our spindle will not be sitting at a true 90 if I go with that. It'll be sitting slightly back. You might think that's a good thing because it will lift that swing arm up, and then when the swing arm is preloaded or loaded with weight, it'll bring it right back down. But you want your spindle to sit at dead 90 degrees to the ground, and also of course to your bumper. And then the swing arm itself can be welded to the spindle on a slight angle. Much better that way, because otherwise your arc changes as you open the swing arm if you put the spindle on an angle. So you want that spindle to be dead straight. So I'm going to align this according to the straight edge, and I'll weld it up. I'll put a tack weld right there, and I'll know that I'm absolutely bang on dead level. Little tip for you. There it is, tacked together, and let's double check and make sure that it is absolutely flat by putting our straight edge in place again. And yes, indeed, it's perfectly flat. So that's what you want. So now we can go ahead and move on from there. I don't have my spindle and hub arrangement yet. It's on order and will be here soon. In the meantime, I've made myself a mock-up of the spindle out of 1.5-inch tube, and I put a little collar on it so that it stops at the appropriate, in fact that's upside down, so that it stops at the appropriate point once it's placed into the bumper housing. And then I've also got a 3-inch piece of stainless tube that I cut to length so that it will simulate the hub. So let's drop those into place. There's the spindle. There's where the hub would be. They're nicely centered. And you can see I got lots of clearance all around. And the backup light is still reasonably visible. Happy Monday. It is the start of a new week, and I'm going to continue with this bumper build. So we got as far as fairing in these sides, and by fairing in I mean adding these pieces of plate to the tube that is central to the bumper. That's pretty much ready to go, or so I thought. But now that I look at it from behind here, this angle is off a bit. We're definitely sloped down towards the center of the vehicle. So I'm going to have to correct that. Now, this is a true 1 inch all the way across, which is what I wanted. but I may end up having to reduce that to maybe about 3/4 of an inch over here, or change the shape of that plate a little bit to make it work just a bit better. So I'm going to play with that so that I can get a nice flat line underneath that tail light. And until I'm satisfied with that, I won't move ahead with putting that side on. On this side, however, I have been able to put the plastic mock-up in place. It matches up to the front of the back of the fender rather, really nicely. Ignore that line. That's a line that I scribed on there, marked on there last time, in case I needed to shorten, but I didn't. So it fits really nicely. The height is good. It's just underneath my cut line, so I'm happy with that. The only issue is, when we come back here, I'm using a larger spindle this time than I did last time. So it fits okay here, but once I go ahead and put the actual, the mock-up of the housing on it and try to center it, you can see that it's shoving the whole side of the bumper out. So what I'm going to have to do is just trim in here a little bit to allow that to fit in nicely. And what I'm going to do to create sort of a fairing or a cowling around it is use this 4-inch piece of tube that I've sliced in half. So we're actually going to have to cut this side back a bit further, of course, to allow for that. But then we'll have a really nice matching radius that will look good on the finished product. So now I'll go ahead and trim this out just slightly, or I may even just leave it as is. I'll trace this out onto some 3/16 steel or possibly 10 gauge. It'd be nice to keep it light by using the 10 gauge. But of course the 3/16 gives us a little more material to rely upon when we hit obstacles. So I'll have to kind of think about which material I want to use for that. It's going to be well braced between the side of the bumper and the mounts on the frame as well, so it's not really that much of a concern in that regard, but I'm not too sure what material to choose yet. And then once I've actually got this cut out in steel, I'll take it and get it formed at my supplier. Again, I can't form anything this large, and once it's formed, bring it back, put it in place. Of course, I'll have interference here, but at that point I can just take it back slowly until I'm satisfied with the fit up. I might do that rather than trying to adjust the plastic mock-up first. I redid this corner. These are still the original pieces, but I took some careful measurements and I discovered that this side, both of these points here were about 1/4 inch too low. So if I brought them up by 1/4, it would even that line out really nicely. So I made myself a new plastic mock-up for the back panel, and also a new plastic mock-up for the side there to match it up. And from those, I've made some steel pieces, so I'm ready to go ahead and put those in place, and I'm pretty confident that's going to fix things up. So I'll put the blanket down to protect the truck. I'll cut this fairing off, and we'll add the new one in. And I have also cut out the sides of the bumper. They're over here. And I've sanded those down and made sure they're really nice and symmetrical, and they're ready to go as well. So now what I'm going to do is mark my bend lines on these for my supplier. I'll send them over to him, and he'll get these formed up for me. Once I get them back, we'll attach them to the truck and move on from there. I am at the point of weld up now. I'm happy with the way these sides are sitting. As I have noted, they're braced. I don't know if you can see the brace down in there. Yeah, you can see that. So they're nice and solid, so I feel confident to remove this from the vehicle now and start some welding. And the reason that I need to start some welding now is because, of course, the center section itself is that 2x4 tube, but these corners are made up of 3/16 plate. And I need to really solidify that at this point before I can move on much further. So I'm going to remove the top plate so that I can get at these joints. I'll open them up with a zip disc to make sure I've got appropriate weld prep. We'll weld all of this corner solid. Probably do the same over to the other side there. We'll add the top plates in as well, Right now, this piece is not fixed in position, it's just sitting here. But once I get that tacked into place, then I can kind of come up with my shape that I want to create for the top there. We'll get that tacked in place, again, same for the other side. And then we'll put the bumper back on the vehicle and we'll weld the spindle in once I'm completely satisfied that it's sitting at a true 90 in both directions. All right, so the first welds have been done. I've welded basically this entire corner up, the spindle housing, we'll call it. And what I discovered while I did that is that my my cowling that will surround the hub for the spindle sticks just over the edge of this housing. So I just added a little piece of angle iron on there, 1 by 1 by 1/8 inch thick angle iron. Added that in place so that when my cowling or fairing is put in position and it comes over the edge, it will have a nice piece underneath there to block everything off. Now, I haven't fully welded this yet. I will weld that and blend it out so that it just looks like one smooth piece of metal, but I want to make sure this isn't going to hit the back of the truck before I commit to that. So I've only tack welded this in place for now. But it's looking good. This housing is complete. I didn't really brace the bumper up to weld that because it was braced here already in terms of, you know, just pulling this side in. And because it was fully boxed and really well tacked up first, I figured it wouldn't warp too much. This side, that's not the case. This is all, you know, thinner material. It's not boxed, so I'm gonna have to brace that pretty considerably before I feel comfortable welding that. But my main thing was to just get this spindle positioned perfectly 90 degrees in this way and perfectly 90 degrees this way as well, as we saw on the truck. So I want to just go ahead and put it back on the vehicle now and make sure we've had no warpage issues, get that spindle to exactly 90 degrees. I might tack it in place, but I doubt it at this point because there's still quite a lot of work to do around it. So I think it's kind of pointless to tack it at this point, but we'll just make sure that it does sit at a perfect 90 in both directions, and then we can move on from there. So we'll put it back on the vehicle, double check that, double check the clearance here, take a good look and make sure that we're happy with everything else, and then we'll remove it one more time and we'll brace it up. We'll brace it between the frame mounts and we'll do some bracing vertically along here for when I add my top, like I've done on this side already. So I probably should have pointed it out here. We'll do bracing between this point and down to the bottom so that when I run a real long weld there, we don't get any lift or warpage that way. And we'll box this in a little bit with bracing and make sure that we don't get warpage there either. So that's the only weld I did on this side. And again, because it's similar over there, that had a lot of structure already tacked together here, I didn't feel that it was going to be capable of warping there, but all of this is, so that's why we'll brace that up first. But let's put it back on the vehicle and make sure we're happy with the spindle, and then we'll move on from there. And I should also mention that the reason why I haven't welded this edge yet is because, again, I didn't want this to pull in at all. This is going to potentially affect this side of the bumper, so I wanted to leave as much open as possible, but I can still put my top plate on already because it only comes to this very edge right here, and I can do this weld along with the top plate all at once later on. So this is pretty much complete in terms of welding the boxed in section, and that's why I'm comfortable to put it back on the vehicle now. So I placed the bumper back on the vehicle as I said I would, because I wanted to check my clearance right in here with this little wedge that I added, or little shelf that I added. And as you can see, there's tons of room. If the vehicle hadn't been in the accident and this damage wasn't there, this portion would be considerably further back and it may actually contact. So it was definitely worth checking. If I do another one of these builds on a vehicle without any damage to it, I may need to take a second look at that to make sure that it's going to work. But in this case, no problems at all. And I was also a little bit concerned about this portion right here. I felt that it might contact the plastic here. And if you look very closely, you can see just a little mark on there where it did contact the plastic during install. But now that it's securely mounted on the vehicle, there's actually about 1/8 of an inch gap in there. But I'd like a little more than that. I'd like about 1/4. So you can see I've marked myself a line there to cut, and we'll just blend that out and make it look nice and smooth. There is just a tiny void visible there. I might fill that up as well, but otherwise I'm very, very happy with the fit up. No warpage issues at all from putting some heat to this thing. Now again, on this side, I didn't put a lot of heat. I didn't do really a lot of full welds on here. I want to brace it up pretty significantly on this side before I do that. But over here, we did pour a ton of heat into the bumper, and we've got no visible warpage at all. The side of the bumper is still sitting exactly correct, but what I still need to check is that spindle orientation to make sure, again, that it's 90 degrees this way and also 90 degrees this way. So that's my next step. So now that I'm happy with the fit up here, and we know we've got lots of room to work with, I'll remove the bumper again. First weld I will make will be this one right here, and then we'll blend that out to give a nice smooth surface so it all looks like one piece. Then we'll add this fairing or cowling piece back in place, just like so, weld it up, and away we go. Now, I should point out, I've got about a 1/4 inch gap, maybe not quite, 3/16, 1/4 inch gap between the top of this cowling and the top of the top plate of the bumper here. What I'm going to do is just lift this up by 1/8 of an inch by placing some 1/8 inch flat bar underneath it to split that gap up, and at that point it will definitely be weldable. So in hindsight, I would have made this about a 1/4 inch taller, but I don't have any more of this material around right now, so this is going to do just fine. It's no problem to fill an 1/8 of an inch gap like that. So once we get that all welded in, then we'll fair in this little portion here with another little piece, and we'll come around this side here to kind of fair that in and make it all look good as well, and tuck it up under the tail light as much as we reasonably can. And then it's pretty well complete. We'll brace the bumper up fully, weld it totally, and add that top plate on as well. We may just tack that for now, and then we can get a start on building the actual swing arm for the vehicle. There you go. That piece is welded and sanded nice and flat, so now we've got a really good surface to set that cowling on and weld it in place. So there's the cowling back in place. I marked on the top of the bumper here the actual crescent that I wanted this to sit on, and of course I've obscured that by placing this 1/8 inch piece of plate on there to space the cowling up like I said I would. So I've only tacked on this side so that I can basically use that like a hinge to adjust this if necessary. So now let's remove this piece together and see how close I came. Yeah, so that's actually very good. I really don't need to adjust it at all. I'll now tack up here, and that will complete it for now. Maybe I'll throw a tack down there as well. And then that'll be nice and solid. We can kind of fill this section in and worry about this area here as well once I've removed the welding blanket so that we can see exactly what's going on. I've reapplied the top plate and added the little outside portion of it. Again, the reason why I added that separately rather than simply cutting a hole in there, which is what I would have preferred to have done, is because I only had a piece that was 60 inches wide, which is that width, and I just had to add that on because that's what I happen to have in stock, and I wasn't going to get a new piece cut for this, only because at the moment, steel generally, but checker plate specifically, is unbelievably expensive. So we're just going to have to make do with what we've got. I think one little teeny weld there that will be visible won't be the end of the world, and in fact it'll barely be visible because the hub covers almost all of it. But anyway, this is all nicely solidified now. I'm really happy with how it's gone together, and basically what I need to do is fill this area here to create a decent look, kind of similar to what we have over here. And the way that I did that was just made myself a template from a piece of Coroplast, which is corrugated plastic like I always use, and I simply pushed that into position so that the point here wound up where I wanted it, underneath the vehicle, or underneath the tail light there, and that I had the clearance that I wanted at this point. I then reached from underneath the bumper and marked with a marker that design. Pretty straightforward. So now I'll go cut this out. I will mark this shape onto a piece of steel, and we'll cut that out, put it in place, make sure it fits nicely. If it doesn't, we'll adjust it, get it tacked in, and away we go. Now, I had said that I was going to remove the bumper in order to get all this stuff tacked up, but I found that I had plenty of room to work with it on the vehicle, so I never did remove the bumper. I just protected the vehicle with the welding blanket that's in there, and went ahead and did it all on the vehicle with the battery disconnected, of course. But pretty soon it's going to start getting really tight to work in here. Basically, as soon as I have this piece, I can maybe tack this end of it, but obviously I can't tack anywhere under the headlight, so I might tack it here and then remove the bumper and complete it once I'm done, or I might just get the piece cut to the point that I'm very comfortable that it fits nicely and weld it up off of the vehicle. And there you are, simple as that. It worked out nice the first try. I'm happy with my gap there. It's probably just under 3/8, maybe 5/16 gap there. The radius matches nicely, and it sits well right up against the other piece there, which I'll blend it into. And it winds up at a point similar to where the top plate ends. So once I put a plate on the front, that'll make a really nice clean look. And that's about that. So now I'll remove this guy. And there we are. So now all I have to do is draw this onto a piece of steel, cut it out, put it in place, tack it up. We'll cap that end there like I was talking about, and figure out a little something for this section. And this is pretty well complete. I have cut that piece out of steel. I have placed it in position using a magnet, and I have put the hub back in and just placed a piece of 2x3 on the top of the bumper. This is likely the material that I'm going to be using for the swing arm. So I wanted to have that in place to make sure I had enough clearance in this area. And as you can see, I've got plenty, especially because, in fact, I want this piece to run flush with the outside here. So we'll have a section that runs out something like this, and then it will have a bend in it that goes along there. So tons of room in there. That, once capped, is going to create a really nice look. So I'm very happy with that. And again, the magnet there keeps everything nice and flat and in position. So I'll just protect the back of the truck again, and I'll tack this in place once I'm completely happy with it. If we look closely, I'll just take the hub out of the way for a moment. If we look very closely, I have a little bit of an overlap here, which I'm not happy with, and I've marked the line that I'd prefer. So I'm just going to remove this piece, open that up a little bit more, put it back in place, and tack it, and then we'll move on from there. And tacked in place. Remove that blanket and the magnet. And you can see that we've got a really nice fitting piece now. And once I put a plate on there, it's going to be really clean. We've got well over a 1/4 inch gap there, probably 5/16, maybe even 3/8, which will be maintained the whole way down. So that's going to be a really nice finish. So now what I will do is I'll take a zip disc and cut between this point here and this point here. Just make a flat line across there, and we'll cut a piece to fit in there, and we'll tack that in as well and move on from there. Now I could just hammer this edge down a little bit and work around it, but then I've got this weird point that I'd have to shape my triangular piece around, and that's just a pain. So better to zip disc this section off and make a plain old triangle that I need to create.
Well, it's a little bit of an anticlimactic end to part 1, but that is, of course, why we make part 2. And I will do my best to get part 2 out to you as soon as possible. I thank you for your patience, as always. I know I take forever getting stuff out, but life is busy, and that is a good thing. In part 2, we're going to focus on the build of the swing arm itself. We will, of course, finish up the bumper also, but we'll focus on the swing arm. It includes a ton of cool options like a high-lift jack mount, fuel can holder, a fold-up table with some really cool stainless steel locking hinges, and a bunch more. So please do come back for that. Thanks again for joining me here at Balmer's Workshop. Always nice to have you here, and we will see you again next time. Please be safe, be well, and take care.